All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Asking for a Friend podcast, the last episode of this series.
Yes.
And we've had a blast. So before we start, question for the audience. I didn't even tell you I'm going to do this. Drop it in the comments. So we're recording today, November 1st.
Mm-hmm.
The question is,
Merry Christmas. Mm-hmm.
Does Christmas start now or does Christmas start after Thanksgiving? Okay. I'm pro after Thanksgiving. You could guess where Jul is.
This question is designed to help you work on the communication skills that we've been talking about throughout this series.
Yeah, this morning I told Siri to play Thanksgiving music. It did not go over well.
No.
But there's no such thing. But anyways, we are excited. We're honored that we get to jump in, answer your questions on all things parenting, dating, marriage. We've heard great feedback that's been helpful. So hopefully today's helpful as well.
Yeah, we think so. We hope so.
Awesome.
So I'm going to ask William you the first question. Yeah. I'm losing hope in my generation of men, and I keep hearing, I'm not good enough for you, I can't lead you, things like that. What is your advice to college women going through this and ask and question, will they ever meet somebody, find the right person? What do you think?
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
First, I'm going to speak to the men. I'll let you speak to the women.
Good.
So, I'd say to the person asking this question, you got to be patient. Biologically, men develop slower than women when it comes to your brain development and things like that. So naturally, there's a little bit of a lag. But the bigger issue here is culturally, there's a massive lag. We have delayed manhood. We have prolonged adolescence. We've entered into this adult adolescent phase and stage where most cultures historically start a manhood process when you are 13 years old. Now, manhood starts when you graduate college, maybe, and so.
But you have to move out of your parents' house to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not this call to manhood. There's not this pathway that back a long time ago, your tribe kind of led you to this path. So that's a big part for us as Christian fathers of creating this pathway. And we've talked about this, of creating this pathway for your kids, specifically your sons, to manhood.
Yeah.
And so, man, if you are in college and, you're having a hard time, honestly, with the maturity of college boys, don't settle, be patient, just, recognize what it is, and the right person's going to come along.
Yeah. I think specifically speaking to the women, the danger that you don't want to fall in is saying to that person or saying to yourself, like, well, yeah, you are good enough for me. You can lead me. You can, and we settle because we are impatient.
Yeah.
We settle because, our friends are getting engaged, our friends are getting married and things like that, or we feel pressure. But remember, part of our heart behind doing this podcast, like we want to share things that we are learning and have learned, like to help you have a lasting marriage. Yeah.
Correct.
You can absolutely settle for the guys saying that and that type of thing. If you're not planning on having a marriage that is that in depth or that lasts and that type of thing. Because if you do get into a relationship, a marriage, so to speak, with somebody who isn't mature enough to lead you, like it will end. It will not go well and last. So don't let yourself fall into that trap. Don't let yourself settle. It's that analogy of let them come up to your standards. Don't lower your standards for the men, for the boys that aren't ready at this point.
There's a refining. We talked about this on the sermon Sunday. Like there's a refining process for you as individuals in your marriage, right? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about, man, you aren't even showing signs of maturity. And signs of leading.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if to be honest, if a guy is saying to you, like, I'm not good enough for you, I can't lead you, like, He said it.
Yeah,
Like, listen to him. He's being honest. Like, you have to be honest, you know, and make that decision, you know, and don't fall into that trap. So.
All right. Next question. My boyfriend and I think this is first off, a great question that's probably not talked about enough. So my boyfriend and I have past sexual sin with other people before we started following the Lord and started dating. Should we discuss past sexual sin with your partner during dating, during engagement, or ever?
Big question. And he's right. A really good question that I think people have different opinions on. But kind of the idea, the picture for this is, yes, right? At some point.
Some level, some point, it needs to be talked about.
Yeah, this is not every first date conversation.
No.
Every second date, third date. Nope. This is a conversation that you have somebody that you have gotten to know well.
Yeah.
That you respect each other. You already are having honest conversations about other things before you have this conversation. And it's somebody, quite frankly, that you see and you have talked about some kind of future with. You know, it's not... It's a very, very vulnerable and sensitive topic and conversation. So that is something that you only would talk about and share at that point in your relationship where you see it going forward, where you see it growing because of those things. It's not an easy conversation for either person to have, but it's important that you wait till it's at that point to have it.
Yeah, and I think very nuanced, as a lot of these things are. If you are 20, you know, or if you know, you've been dating for 6 months and you're like, we're in love, we're going to get married. If you are 38 and you're divorced and you're, you know, seriously dating someone, like those types of conversations are totally different. Right? Sure. But big picture, big arching kind of principles around it, you know, like what you said, I think that in general, that's a good like framework of, hey, we're not engaged, but we are like heading down that road. And we have had other conversations. This isn't the first conversation like this, but it's part of a series of conversations that you're having before we kind of enter into this engagement period. So yeah, I'd say kind of some guiding things around that. So that's one. I think the other side is avoid details. It's just unnecessary, right? Like, you know, I think it's important to talk about, but there's no point in going into sharing the details or asking for all the details of all that stuff. The past is the past. You know? So there's no need to really dig too deep into that.
Exactly. You know? And because the point of that isn't to know every detail, isn't to, you know, the only person that knows all of your sins, like, is going to be Jesus. So like the point of that is to have an open and honest conversation. Both of you be open and honest. You know, it's not meant for one person to prod into the other person's past. Like, it is to have that open and honest conversation with each other, to be able to heal and to move forward together in your relationship, again, that you see a future with.
Correct. I mean, because there's no condemnation. It's in Christ Jesus. There is no condemning inside of your marriage, right? So you're not sharing this information to hold it over someone's head or to constantly bring it up or to compare, or whatever the case is. This is, like you said, it's a vulnerable conversation. Hey, we know what we're kind of walking into as we move towards marriage.
Absolutely. Next question. We're shifting to talking about kids, children, and parenting. This question says, my kids are all drastically different. How do you manage parenting them without showing favoritism or applying parenting, you know, to each child? How do you do that?
It's a great question. We got 3 kids that are very, very different. Jul texted our family this morning. You know, they were sorting, or they had their Halloween candy out, and she's like, the oldest is sorting the candy. The middle is trading his candy for other candy, and the third is just eating it at 6 in the morning.
Yep. Very different.
Very different. So you probably have heard this before, or you know this in your head. Each kid is different. You have to parent each kid different. So I'll flip it back to you. What does that look like? How? That's a great principle, but what does that even mean?
Yeah. So like William said, like you say that and you're like, oh, every kid's different. We're going to pair them differently. And what ends up happening? You go down the path of parenting them the same, only to be met with frustration. I mean, vividly, I have times with all three of them, you know, especially 2 and 3, where the 6th, 7th, 8th time a situation is happening with that kid, that child, and we're, you know, ready to just pull our hair out. We are so frustrated until finally we realize we're doing it the same. We are approaching it the same way that we approached it with our older child or another child, and it is not working. It's not true for all things parenting. Obviously, there are certain rules that every kid has to follow and principles that every kid has 100%. To follow. But the approach and the way that we parent those, it matters. Their emotions, their personality, how they listen, how they communicate well. So you have to really, you know, shift your mindset, our mindset when that happens.
What do you, give me an example of like what you mean.
Yes. So, okay. So an example I would say is with our third, our youngest is almost 4. He'll be 4 in February. Our first 2 boys, when they turned toddlerville, time to put them into a toddler bed and post crib, it was a pretty good transition. That's always a difficult transition.
Sure.
No matter, you know, any situation. But the first 2, they both listened well. You know, our Liam was very good at, you know, here's the rules and I stay within the rules. Hudson pushed it a little bit more, but generally followed. Briggs, before he was 2, learned how to crawl out of the crib, open his door. We have stairs. This was our first house having stairs with a toddler his age. So we were met with a whole new set of challenges, and we did not know how. We were getting so frustrated. Yeah. And, you know, toddlers, when did they
We had that little net thing over the bed, which would keep the other 2 trapped in. He would learn how to unzip it from the inside, or he'd fall out of the bed and be upside down.
Also, if you don't know what we're talking about, parents with toddlers know what we're talking about. So there's literally like a net that goes inside of a crib. It kind of looks like a tent that you can see through. You have to make it fun to your kids, right? And we didn't have to use it with our other 2, but we sure had to we went through a couple with Briggs and zips him up. He learned how to unzip it. He learned how to crawl out. You know, and all this to say that example made us, after nights and nights of frustration, stop. It's not a conversation you can have with Briggs. It's not his problem. It was our problem. So we had to stop and say, okay, this is different. This is a new challenge for us. This is difficult. The other 2 didn't have a problem like this. Maybe the house, the setting was different. How can we approach this differently to help parent him through this, get ourselves through this, and everyone be happy? Yeah. And so that's what we mean by that. By, you know, don't get to that point where you're months and months in to really having a difficult situation with one of your kids, because you haven't shifted the approach and the mindset of how to parent that. When you 2, you know, the 2 of you need to have a conversation and say, whoa, pump the brakes. Yeah. How do we need to look at this and approach this differently?
Sure. I think another example around that is consequences for your kids. I think this is really where the tension amongst siblings can raise, where they feel like there's an unfairness happening, right? Because the consequence for Liam, maybe that is, man, you are going to take away, you can't watch TV. Okay. That's going to hit home with him. He's going to be like, oh my gosh, he's super upset about it, but he's learning a lesson there. We might say that to Hudson, and Hudson's like, okay, whatever.
I'll go outside.
Yeah. I'll go outside and play, you know? And vice versa. Like, so recognizing, man, the consequences have to be different because they're different kids. They're going to respond differently. They're not only just different interests, but, man, to take away time with a friend versus time with a thing, it might connect differently. And so, one, thinking about that for your kids and what that looks like. But then when they bring it up where they
Mm-hmm.
feel like there's favoritism shown, or when they feel like, man, why don't they ever get in trouble for this? Or why hear this a lot with, our oldest kind of be like, why do I have to do this? And they don't have to do it. I'm like, well, you're 9,
Right.
you're not 3.
Sure.
Why
do I have to do homework every day?
Exactly. Yeah. And the reality is, you are parenting different, and it's going to look like favoritism to a 9 and a 7 and a 3-year-old. It's going to, or a 15-year-old, it's going to look like favoritism to them. It's even when it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think being aware of that, recognizing, man, maybe sometimes I do need to spend more time with this one kid working on this one thing. Let me be aware of that so that I do spend extra time with the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
But all that to say, the big overarching goal that we have to remember, it's not to make our kids feel great. It's
Correct.
just not. It's not to make them feel like they're the favorite, or they're the center of the world, or, whatever the case is. Like, our ultimate goal is to raise Jesus believing, loving, respectable men in our society. So
kids. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing, this goes a little bit more into the tangible everyday parenting things. Especially, this was super helpful for me early on. It was one of the best pieces of advice I got as a new mom, but as new parents. But it really relays, it looks differently as your kids go older. But being comfortable saying out loud why you're doing what you're doing, whether that be when we had to, our kids were little and we kind of did the cry it out method when they were, younger babies, whatever age that was, to help get kids get through the night, sleep through the night and that type of thing, sleep training. Very difficult thing to do as a parent, no matter what. And especially at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, it's very, very tough. And I remember somebody saying, it really, really helps you say out loud, whether you're whispering in the middle of the night or whether you're telling your 15-year-old for the 15th time, no, you can't go spend the night at this friend's house, the parents that we don't know.
Sure.
But you're saying to them, do you know why, Liam, you can't do that? It's important that mommy and daddy know where you spend your time, because we don't want anything to happen to you that's unsafe, or when you're saying out loud in the middle of the night, sleep training, like, this is what we're doing to help establish healthy sleep habits for our baby.
Yeah.
It really, really does. And I think our kids really start to receive it after time. They are always going to push back, especially if they don't like the answer. But it helps us to be confident in what we're parenting and what we're saying and the decisions we made. And so that when, like the question asked about favoritism, like, no, this is already in place because we know that this is best for you and this is why. So we're going to continue to follow through with that. And you're not going to be wishy-washy, but you stand firm. Yep.
It's the last episode, so we'll say all the things. But as a reminder, you will fail. You will get it wrong. Apologize. Yeah. Apologize to your kid when you get it wrong. Apologize to your spouse when you get it wrong, because we're human and we do. And then the best things for our kids is to hear mom or dad say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. So remind yourself of the why. 100%. Remind yourself of what you're working towards.
Yep.
And give yourself some grace.
Yeah. We can't say that enough with apologizing. I saw that, with our first a lot, because and that's our tendency. It's our first kid. We think, oh my goodness, we have to get this right. We can't have more kids if we don't get this right. And it couldn't be more the opposite. And I found myself doing that with our oldest. I rarely apologized, and I was doing all the things wrong, or a lot of the things wrong. And then you start to raise a kid who has a hard time apologizing. And you realize when you step back, he doesn't hear us say it.
Yeah.
And we need to be saying it because we have things to apologize for. It doesn't mean that you can't stand firm to those rules and principles and things like that, but we apologize when we get it wrong so that we teach your kids to apologize when they get it wrong.
Yep.
So
that's good. All right. Last question. Between work, kids, and just plain life events.
Yes.
What are ways you can prioritize your marriage in the middle of all of everything
life,
else.
kids, events, hobbies, all the things. You start, and I'm going to chime in with something at the end.
The guiding principle, if it's the foundation of your family, right? It's the, if your marriage is rocky, everything else is unsettled, right? So, understanding, man, this is not like for me to prioritize my marriage, is not, belittling to everything else or whatever the case is. Like it's not taking away any of that stuff. Like it is strengthening. It's in some ways it can feel counterintuitive, but it's strengthening my kids, my relationship with my kids. It's strengthening my ability for how I perform at work and all the different things. Right. So having the mindset that like, man, this is a priority. This is the thing that if I don't everything else is going to try to suffocate it. So if you don't prioritize it, nobody else is going to prioritize your marriage.
Yep. So
in that, I would say, okay, what can you do? Consistent date nights is, you hear it say all the time. What does that mean? Okay. Date night doesn't have to be some big, extravagant $200 night out at all. A date night, let's define what a date night is. Date night is me and you and no distractions and just time together.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So a date night can be sitting on the back porch, phones put away, TV's off.
No show. Yep.
No show. We're talking. Or a date night can be going out to eat, or going to, I wouldn't say a movie, but going and do something together, right? Spending quality time together. So, I think sometimes we can maybe make it too extravagant, overemphasize it maybe a little bit, and not overemphasize it, but overemphasize what needs to happen to make the date night happen. We emphasize the shiny things around it.
Yes, for sure. I would say one thing too, beyond date nights are necessary. I think date nights should be weekly. I don't have any problem saying that. In some form or fashion. Again, it doesn't mean it has to be some big expensive meal. It doesn't even have to leave your house, but it does have to be time where you're not working on, you're not working at night. The kids are in bed. You don't have activities that night. I mean, there's a lot of things. So date night. But I also think, and this is something that changes, it looks differently in every season of parenting and kids, but having an evening routine, a time where your kids are expected to either be in bed or in their rooms. And mom and dad now are having mom and dad time, whether that includes dinner, time together, whatever, just your time for the evening. There needs to be a separation. I think, and we see this as our kids get older, that can get later and later, and activities push it back and things like that. But I will tell you, if you do not, you're going to have a harder time prioritizing your marriage with that. Because you don't ever have a time where family time ends, together time begins. It's just one big blur. And then you start the next day. And like William said, it affects everything else. Then you're more frustrated at work. Your kids are more frustrated at school. It is a cycle. So
it's like if you have a date night once a week, but you haven't actually talked throughout the week because, like you said, it's all blurred together. Kids have blended that whole time. Like you get to date night and you're like, well, what are we going to talk about?
Yeah. And you're just exhausted. You just actually want to sleep. So don't do that. But that's what I mean. I really do think it's helpful. It has been helpful for us. It looks different in every stage. Even, I'm talking to parents of teenagers and things like that too, or older kids or those with young kids.
Infants,
kids, have a time, again, whether they're in their rooms and doing homework or reading, but a time where they're no longer watching TV, watching the football game with dad, or whatever the case may be. There's a time, and then your time together begins. For as many nights as you throughout your week, and what your week looks like, that you can do that. I think that's huge.
No, exactly. And for a frame of reference, that could be 15 minutes, that can be an hour. Like, we're not talking like, man, you need this massive amount of time, but there has to be like a personal personal check-in with each other.
And I would say the principle behind that, how do you prioritize your marriage? Like, I want our kids to see that we prioritize our marriage. They see that we prioritize them because we're taking them to soccer and karate and football and school and birthday parties and football games, and the list goes on and on and on and on.
Yep.
But I want them to see, hey, mommy and daddy have a date night today. Or, hey, it's 8:00 and that's time. You don't have to, I always say this to my kids. I was like, I don't care if you're asleep. You don't have to be asleep, but you have to be in your room. You have to be in your bed, and things like that, so that they know, hey, this is time. And we say it out loud. We say, this is time, for mom and dad, and you need to be in your bed, questions asked, ready, that type of thing. So that's how they see it's a priority for you guys.
You're modeling it. You're modeling, and you don't, in the moment, you don't see it. You don't see that like, oh, I'm modeling what a healthy marriage can look like for my kids. But I promise you, they will grow up and they will remember, oh, this is what my parents did, or this is how my dad acted, or this is how my mom acted, And so it's just those little deposits that you're making that you don't think are making a big deal. You really don't. And in the moment, you just want to say, because I said so, go to your room, right? It's, I've told you 8 times to go to your room, whatever. But saying, hey, this is our time. It's time for you to go to your room, go read. I don't care, whatever. So that's great. That's good advice.
We love you, but we'll see you tomorrow. But yes. And just, we share this with a different podcast with answering this question. Just remember, where you spend your time is where your priority lies. Mm-hmm. So if you're spending all your time, husband at work, wife at work, that's your priority. Yep. If you're spending all your time running all your kids around to every activity and everything that they could be involved in, every sport they can play, that's what you prioritize. Yeah. If you're spending, and so on with your hobby, every evening, every weekend, can't make time for church or can't make time for a date night, but you're making time doing X, Y, or Z. Yeah. That's your priority. So if you want to have a shift and you want it to be about your marriage, like, you have to model that and you have to make that time.
That's good.
All right.
We did it. We're done. Thank you guys so much. It truly has been a blast for us. Yes. And we've really enjoyed it. Shout out to my main man, Daniel, for pulling this thing out and making it happen. And who knows, we might do it again at some point later, but appreciate you guys texting questions in.
Yes.
Hope it was helpful. Hey, and you can always text questions in. I was going to say that 94000. The number's always open. So if anything comes up, I'll be able to see those and I at least can text you back. So.
Yes, a way to share. But we appreciate your feedback. We hope that this was helpful. Again, continue to ask questions and things like that. But we appreciate your time.
All right. See you guys.